Hello and welcome to Talking About My Generation. I'm Herb Ricardo here with Rich Grego and Alicia Vassar. And today, I think you all are going to really enjoy this one. This is, all of them are great. We love all of them. But I think this one's going to resonate with so many of you out there. So let me go ahead and just do a little reading about what we're actually going to be talking about because I want to get it all straight and everything else. So we're going to talk about conspicuous consumption, which is a concept introduced by the economist and sociologist Thorstein Veblen in 1899. And he wrote a book called the Leisure Class.
Theory of
And,
the leisure
and
class.
what's that?
Theory of the leisure class.
Thank you very much. Yeah, the theory of the leisure class, and it refers to, our purchasing, and do we purchase specifically for the utility of what we're using it for, or are we buying on a higher level than what we're actually able to afford to give people the impression that we're at a higher level of socioeconomic place. And there is no doubt that over the last 100 years, this area has been studied by marketers. It's been studied by behavior philosophers and psychologists. In the idea of what's going through someone's mind, why they're buying what they are, and what's the theory about how they feel. But then, of course, what we truly understand is society and what does society put value on what we purchase and how we purchase it and what and how we're seen based on what we have, right? So anyway, I think I'm going to go ahead and open it up to Rich to share a little bit more because he's quite familiar with this.
Yeah, just and again, I'll try and be brief as possible. But I was just thinking what might be instructive is to put the theory of the leisure class and Thorstein Veblen in sort of this historical intellectual context, because what that theory, the conspicuous consumption theory, sort of emerged from, and what made it really radical and sort of for our times is that prior to his articulating this theory in this book, economics, and it still is to a large extent, as Herb, who teaches it, would know in many respects, is that classical economic theory, and which stemmed from classical social and sort of social psychology theory, was born during the Enlightenment, was that period in Western history, early modern Western history, from, say, 1500 to 1900, say, where you had the scientific revolution occur. And that was huge because it affected everything, as it still does, obviously, right? But the initial scientific revolution, when you had figures like Isaac Newton and Descartes, their big discovery was the mathematical nature of reality. They described it, the universe that we live in, as what they called a clockwork universe, because what they discovered is ways in which if you quantify what's going on around you through mathematical formulas and stuff, you discover all these literal laws of nature, laws of physics, and everything operates by them. So if you get the laws of physics, you can predict and control presumably everything that happens in the universe because they're neat and they're orderly and they're mathematical and they're precise and they're rational. So if that's the case, then philosophers and psychologists figured the same thing is true of human beings. If we live in that kind of a universe, then if you get human beings right, if you get human psychology down to a science, which is what, when you have the social sciences as we know them were born, you can figure out how people as individuals and as societies are going to behave. And hence, you can figure out then from that what their economic behavior is going to be, what their financial behavior, how they're going to spend their money and behave as consumers. And you can map it all out statistically. And to this day, right, that's what most, I guess, in a sense, economists do, right? You go to an economist and they have a theory about stuff. They have these long mathematical, statistical, quantitative formulas for why the market is going to behave as it does, right? And how people are going to behave in the market. Well, then all this started changing around 1900 when you had figures like Albert Einstein who came up with things like relativity theory, so that the neat orderly universe wasn't as orderly anymore. It was relative to people's perspectives. And then you had quantum physics arise, which have things like the uncertainty principle, right? Which means that the universe, even when you're looking at it and you're trying to be as precise as possible, just doesn't behave rationally. It won't behave according to your predictions. And then you've got, of course, the biggest troublemaker was Charles Darwin with the theory of evolution, which suggested that human nature was not simply predictable and orderly and rational. We're animals. Instead of having a clockwork universe, Darwin told us we're living in a jungle. Literally, the universe is a freaking jungle. And, like a butterfly, the old state notion of a butterfly flapping its wings in one part of the world can completely affect what happens in another part of the world. And then finally, so then you translate that into human psychology with figures like Sigmund Freud, who said, well, human beings aren't just these scientifically or understandable, predictable creatures. We're creatures of unconscious, irrational drives that we never even understand, right? And they manifest themselves in all kinds of unpredictable ways. And hence, then, you have then, as an economist, Thorstein Veblen coming along and saying, you know what? You can't just predict people's market behavior and consumer behavior by doing mathematical calculations of what they're going to do, because people are crazy. People will buy things not because they're rational beings that logically predict how how much money they have and how affordable something is. They're going to buy something they can't afford because they want to impress a woman, or they look at sports cars, or they want to impress their friends, or because they're vain. Look at SUVs that are gas guzzling, rolling battleships that don't make anybody any money, but people will buy them because they have a Lexus L printed on them, and all their friends will see them. They'll buy things because on a whim, on a childish whim. That's how you and you can. And how do you predict that? So I know this is long-winded, but I think what was really radical and important about the theory of the leisure class and the idea of conspicuous consumption is that it kind of blows up this notion that if you want to understand people, all you have to do is come up with this scientific, rationally calculable index of how they're going to behave if, say, they want to buy a car. Okay, oh yeah, sure, they'll be rational. They'll think, okay, I need to get something to get me from point A to point B. This is my income. This is what I can afford. And this is what it costs. So that's what's going to make me buy it. But as we all know, I mean, cars are a good example, right? Nobody buys cars. People buy cars for the craziest reasons, or else we wouldn't have sports cars and SUVs, right? So that, I think, is what's important about the theory of the leisure class. And I'll be quiet for the next 45 minutes and let you guys take over. But I think that's a good setup for what we want to explore.
I love that you did the historical like as soon as you said 1899, it made
Yeah,
me think about the fact that things became easily accessible. I think like the Industrial Revolution made things a lot easier for people to get access to.
yeah,
And I've always been super interested in historical history of like fashion and how a lot of the working class emulated the higher class. And they were able to do that through,
yeah,
they
yeah.
have bone corsets and all of these different things. Um, I think more and more, especially to this day, it's become more easily accessible to emulate um, the look of a higher class than it was previously. It was something that you did not have access to the material, you couldn't afford it, all of these things. It became a lot more accessible. Also, credit
Great
probably made
point.
it a lot easier.
Yeah,
That was like a revolution in the way that people had access to things.
great point.
Because I definitely think there's a there is a way that people see Americans that can be very materialistic. And I think that comes out of that, like, credit revolution and things like that.
That's an excellent point. Yeah, yeah. All those economic phenomena. This is what Herb teaches. I mean, I'm sitting here lecturing. This is Herb's bread and butter. But I mean, if you want to look at, you know, organizational behavior or probably consumer behavior, right? Economic behavior of organizations, I suppose, even. It has so much to do with so many factors like that, that have nothing to do with rational calculation and utility. But am I wrong, Herb?
This is the reason why you are on this podcast, not just as a great friend and brother, but someone who is very well, versed and scholarly and able to explain this from a terrific historic perspective. And of course, moving it into the more modern, as Alicia's just brought into, the
Yeah.
question is one of the great things about life is we study certain things, right? We study behaviors, we study all kinds of things that we're interested in. And this whole phenomenon of why do we buy what we buy,
Mhm.
and the fact that there's rationality and irrationality to it, right? And again, functionality. You talked about a car. We could all be driving around in Corollas, Toyota Corollas, which will satisfy getting to work, getting the kids to school, buying groceries, and getting home. It'll satisfy that. You don't have to have a V8 engine that will propel you at 200 miles an hour. You don't have to have basically a house on wheels, the SUV that emulates your living room inside, because that's
Yeah.
exactly what it does, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but what does it give the impression? It gives the impression, look, I can afford this. Look who I am. Look what I have. And that resonates to not only the friends that you have, because then you're going to try to find other friends that have similar thought processes that you have and have the same kind of things that you do, right? But then also, if you're looking for a mate or whatever, you're trying to convey to the class who you're trying to bring in and a partner, look what I have, look who I am. The problem with this for society is it all sounds good, and if we can afford it, everything's fine. But then what happens when we can't afford it? Number one. Number two, we're being deceptive to our friends, our family, and partners, and people at work that we have more than what we have, and and even it even goes into, can I convey that I'm more intellectual than I am? So by an outward showing, I'm trying to convey that what's inside of my mind is greater than it is, right?
Sure.
So so this is the problem with this. This is the, if we call it a problem, but the question is the deception so bad that it's affecting our society in a bad way, or or is the deception just part of life, and that's part of who we are, that we just sometimes we go into a meeting at work and we want to project that we're smarter than we are. We might want to project that we understand the problem, and the solution better than it is, but it may not be, right? Isn't this really who we are, constantly trying to project greater than we are?
I had a question for both of you guys because I think this goes directly in that kind of, is it a deception? And
Mhm.
but also connecting that kind of how that conspicuous consumption can be linked to your identity. Have either of you heard of the performative male trend?
No, no, I have not.
So this will be an interesting one.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
so there is like a joke that was started online about performative males, and it'll be a guy, and he'll be walking around, and he'll be specifically accessorized. He'll be wearing like he would look like he'd be in Greenwich Village. He'd be really well dressed and stuff. He'd be fashionable, but he would have a book, and a lot of times they would put the book would be a feminist book. So like Bell Hooks. Um, and the idea is that some men get so stuck up in the idea of performing a idealized version of themselves for women.
Hmm.
And I think there's that idea of, what is authenticity? What
Yeah.
is authentic
Mhm.
to you? Are you just trying to get women because you are, reading a feminist book and you're trying to show them, oh, I'm a safe person?
Mhm.
Or is it genuine? Because like the first time I met David, David read Bell Hooks. One of the first books he bought for me was a Bell Hooks book.
Mhm.
And that was something we genuinely connected over because it's something he genuinely read and understood, and we could talk about it. But I can see if someone just sees, oh, this is what gets attention, um, then I'm just going to essentially peacock. I'm going to
Mhm.
put on the things that make me look ideal so that I can get what I want out of the situation. And I think that can lead to a really awful way of interacting with people.
Yeah, another very incisive point, I think. And it's good advice too. I think Herb's a single, good-looking, available. Where next time he's
Hey,
trolling
I
for
can
babes.
send you the little I got to send you guys the little setups because they have the little keychain, like the Lububu keychains. They
Oh
have a
yeah, there you go.
Starbucks drink that's like a green tea matcha. It's very
Nice.
specific.
So, okay, so then the flip side to this, right?
Yeah,
A male might say, you know what? It's hard for me to penetrate and get in with a particular society of women or partners who I want, right? So if by projecting this I can get in there, at least I get an interview, right?
yeah,
That
yeah,
Mhm.
yep,
that can certainly be the point too, right?
yeah, yeah,
Um, as much as it might appear fake, in one sense, um, yeah, you could start, and somebody could, you could have to start a conversation. They say, well, I didn't know you were an avid reader. And the person could at that point be completely transparent and say, well, actually, I'm not. I just thought I'd carry the book around so that somebody would, and then maybe that, okay, could elicit
yeah,
a positive saying,
yeah.
you know what, how genuine of you to not try to fake it now, but actually be honest
Yeah.
that this is the reason why you're doing it,
See,
right?
Herb's pretty experienced in this regard. He's already
So,
There is a big market for pickup artists. Like the
well,
yeah,
internet loves pickup
yeah,
artists.
yeah,
Well, again, we live in a world, and again, social media will even say that, and if you listen to Scott Galloway,
yeah,
he'll
yeah.
talk about how men are
Very
having a
interesting.
hard time out there.
Absolutely.
Women are making it more and more difficult
Yeah,
for men to approach them,
yeah,
boys to
yeah,
approach girls,
yeah,
and if it continues to be difficult, then why not try to come up with a creative way? That's evolution right there.
yeah.
That whenever you find difficulty in doing something, you try to find a solution to how to
I think
overcome
this
that.
would make a good episode on its own because I think I understand the logic of it, but I think there's a fallacy in the idea that something has to change in the way that women uh, are acting in defense of the very real dangers, which I will not, that danger is as well. Men can deal with abuse and assault and all of these things as well. Um, but this idea that women have to lower their standards or change something when we've seen the reaction of manosphere, where they're accepting very dehumanizing, very um, just inhumane beliefs about women and how to treat women. Um, and I think that, yeah, I think it'd be like a whole entire episode that we could have because there is
Sure.
a lot of talk about like there's this epidemic of loneliness with men, and it frustrates me seeing it perched from the perspective of something is wrong with women. Women are doing
Yeah.
something wrong because we live in a patriarchal society. It automatically tends to fall on women, these ideas and things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and again, this is a great conversation in so many aspects to it. Again, kind of going back to, in the conspicuous consumption environment, and that is then should kind of going into this in this same genre, then should men instead of wearing t-shirts and jeans, kind of wear a kind of a polo shirt or should they step up their dress? Should they again back to this area of projection? How should they project? Um, and now we don't have to go into the psychology and pathology of how they behave, right? This isn't necessarily where we're going, but if you want to, I think this is a great segue into dating apps and the pictures that are posted and presented in dating apps, right? Guys will post pictures of them, with their cars and on boats to show that I've got enough money to go out fishing. I've got enough money to afford an expensive car. Women will show, beautiful dresses. They're at balls. They're at nice restaurants. Even to the point where, and I think you even shared this. I believe you shared this with us the last time, where you can actually rent a location where you go into a private jet and have your picture taken to show that you're in a private jet. Okay, so again, these are all characteristics designed to inflate who we are because we want somebody at what we're perceiving to be our level. But then the question is, if you have to do all those things, are you at that level? And then that's the deception part of, you're even thinking you're at a higher level than you truly are. And so trying to find somebody at a higher level, then suddenly it doesn't work, because after the pictures are shown and then you start the dialogue and conversation, everything starts to break down, right? And and I think whether or not we're using it, you want to use the example of it in the dating environment, or if you just want to use it in the sense of social media, what's the point? What is our point, number one, of conveying that we are more knowledgeable than we are? What's the point of saying that we have more money than we are? What's the point of conveying that we're a higher social status than we are? Um, well, part of that isn't that what we're always trying to do from the time that we were born? And isn't that what our family is always trying to do, is push us up? Aren't we always trying to get up? So by doing these things, are we conveying that we're moving up?
Yeah.
I was interested in the fact that what would it look like to do, I guess, the opposite of, not exactly the opposite, but in a sense,
Be authentic.
instead of
Mhm.
trying to present, yeah, it
Yeah.
is, which is a very hard word to say because being authentic can be very distorted on the internet and things. But thinking about like what is there genuinely that you're reflecting in yourself, in your identity, and seeing how you connect your identity to this thing. Because I think when it's deeper than just, I have nice car, I'm in jet, like there's people who do value those things. But I think for a good portion of people, they just want to genuinely see who you are so that they can kind of get a feel of whether or not you guys mesh or not. Um, so it's very interesting in an online space where everything is very curated. It is very hard to be authentic. So I think it's very interesting the idea of like what does consciously using these things and not trying to peacock, but like genuinely find your identity through these things. Because for me, I do express myself and I'm able to uh connect my identity to my social media and things. But also there's a disconnect enough that when I think you had questions that you gave us before this, podcast and stuff, um, talking about whether or not we feel pressure to present a specific way on social media. And that's what kept me away from social media for the longest time. I never touched social media until I was about 24, 24, 25, 4 or 25. Um, and I love the relationship I have with it where sometimes I just don't even post, but also it's a place where I can make art and I can share things and I can keep memories. And so I'm very interested is like, is there ways that we can use these things that are not as toxic as uh we're kind of showing conspicuous consumption can be? Because it can promote us consuming things like fast fashion. It can you were talking about big like cars. They can be like Hummers and stuff, and they're not, none of them are fuel efficient or good for the environment, but it's the idea of what they present and reflect.
Yeah. I don't know if that's necessarily, that's a good question, what you're both asking, I guess,
Mhm.
right? Herb saying, what's the motivation behind this, right? That's kind of what you were asking. What's the psychological motivation behind this sort of quasi inauthenticity, the conspicuous consumption involves? And you're saying, is there a way to positively to use conspicuous consumption in a sense
Mhm.
in projecting ourselves in a positive way? At least that's what I'm sort of hearing from you guys.
I think
And yeah,
the central thesis of conspicuous consumption, this idea of like consuming above your class and all of these things, is it kind of sets people up for failure. But it's you're signaling your class through your clothes. You're signaling things that, for me, I feel are inauthentic.
yeah. Well, and I think Thorsten Veblen would probably respond that first of all, what's happened now is something I don't think that even back then when it was just beginning, he had envisioned. I don't, you brought up right at the beginning that democratization of economic opportunity has been so enormous over the course of the last century. I don't even think he could have imagined that somebody in what used to be considered a, working class or something like that could afford things that would project that, would project that they belong to a higher class than they did. Because it just wasn't available back then. We've radically democratized things like that through things like the internet and just making the availability of economic goods and services so widespread. We've almost eliminated, well, we haven't eliminated class, but what Thorsten Veblen had in mind then, I think when he was writing this theory of the leisure class, was less maybe what we're talking about. And this was something that I think it would have been very interesting, this development. But I think back then he was sort of claiming that people in the not necessarily the upper class, because they've always been kind of understated because they don't need to project, but the people who are the up and coming sort of in the upper working class or upper middle class, what we would call the upper middle class now, are the people who project through conspicuous consumption. Because they consciously or unconsciously have a reason to flaunt their status, both for self-promotion and for possibly advancement, and to project where they stand in the world to people in lower classes. So that, I think, was the idea, the psychological motivation that he had in mind. I think what we're talking about is something that one way in which this has taken on a dimension that he perhaps never even anticipated, and where it does maybe get destructive. Because what the social classes that he was talking about were trying to do was just to reveal who they were, right? And what they could afford. I think what we're doing now is people are trying to project images of themselves that they never are, or that they aren't. They're essentially using I'm sorry, I'm talking too much again. They're using this medium to lie about themselves, essentially, instead of projecting something or even bragging about themselves. They're lying about themselves, or they're using it in a deceptive way. And I think that makes a big difference. It makes a difference between a kind of authenticity and inauthenticity, if that makes any sense. Yes.
Yeah, no. You're right on point. We're talking about the individual, and what I like about some of his writings was about watering down the value, the
Yeah.
value
Yeah.
of the functionality of
Yeah.
either the thing or then use the idea of traveling, okay? And that
Yeah.
is, look at all the pictures of people show when they're in Paris, the Eiffel Tower. They're not showing themselves in Paris on a street, on a side street. That's got some character, the
Yeah.
cobblestones, the brush door or whatever. They're not showing that, right? Because that doesn't show the whole world that you're in Paris. Maybe that particular street could
Yeah.
be could be in any city, maybe
Yeah.
in Europe. And so what good is that? Show a picture of, look, the Eiffel Tower is behind me. I can afford to be in Paris for a week or 2 weeks or whatever that might be. And then if everybody does that, then doesn't it water down the value of being in Paris? That, again, back to an SUV, maybe like and trucks, the F-150. This is a classic one where it's the number one vehicle sold in the United States. But people who study behaviors of the cars people, I do one of these things, the behavior of the vehicles that people drive or whatever, half the time they don't even use the bed of the pickup truck.
Yeah.
They're washing and waxing it, but they're not using it for its
Yeah.
functionality.
Yeah.
As a
Yeah.
matter of fact, it becomes almost a status symbol to
Yeah.
have the F-150. And
Absolutely.
of course, if you have a newer one or whatever
Yeah.
that might be. So
Yeah.
again, it waters down. This is
Hmm.
what's fascinating about that thought process of the conspicuous consumption, and that is that if we start to purchase things for not for what they are, but for what they convey,
Yeah.
instead of the functionality of what they are we now reducing the value of what something is to, we're relegating it to
Mm.
something that is not of value. So then travel is not that important. And then, of course, one of the things that he talks about is if you were to travel someplace and you weren't going to show it to anyone, would you go to that particular area of Paris and the Eiffel Tower? And maybe you wouldn't because there'd be so many people there. You'd say, you know what? And Rich and I have talked about this a lot because we've traveled around the world and everything else. And Alisha, you will soon enough. But the whole point though is my gosh, I've been so many times in cities that I have not seen the most photographic parts of it. I've gone into back areas, back streets, and again, I find so much more joy and beauty where the locals are and everything else. And I did photojournalism for a while, which I certainly enjoyed. That actually gave to me a better picture of that particular environment than necessarily what everybody
Yeah.
else was. Again, not saying that it's not of value, not saying that you shouldn't do it, but the question is are we doing it for the sake? And there have been a couple of articles that have been written over the last 20 years, especially from the onset of the smartphone and everything else, where people go on vacation, they take pictures for a few minutes and then they leave and they don't sit there and absorb the smells, the people walking around, just the atmosphere. They took the picture because they were able to show their family and friends, look, I was here, but they really didn't experience I was here.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and and I think that's where he's trying to mold his thought process, right?
Yeah, I think travel and automobiles are great example, right? Motor vehicles are great examples of conspicuous consumption, or at least presentations of travel on Facebook and things like that. And social media
Slogan.
are great examples of that, right? Alicia, it seems to me if
Hmm.
you wanted to pick two good examples of where people do that, I suppose dating apps are a great idea, are a great example as well, right?
Well,
Like
of
you
course
guys
they
are
would
saying.
be. Yeah.
Yeah. Although, in answer to your question as well, Alicia, you tell me what you think of this. I think, in terms of presenting yourself, because I think again, we've said this in these podcasts, webcasts, what the hell they are, in the past that, social media in a lot of respects, at least it seems to me, just amplifies, but to some extent it creates entire new genres of human pathology. But I think it mainly just amplifies them, right? If there's a social problem or a psychosocial problem people have, what social media does is it just puts it on steroids, right? Um, and I think, that's one way in which, you can, even in real life, just as on social media, everybody's always trying to, they have to present themselves to the world, right? And you're going out and you're presenting yourself to the world in some way. So they're always trying to project an image. And I think, when I go to a courthouse, I'm going to have to go to a courthouse to do for some official proceeding soon. And whenever I went to the classroom, as a matter of fact, I didn't wear a business suit because I wasn't in the business department like Herb, where you really have to look like a solid citizen. But I always wore a jacket and tie, even as I was wearing jeans. And it wasn't to project an image of something that I wasn't. It was literally the image I wanted to project was respect for my profession and respect for the people who I was coming to talk to. I wanted to let them know that I think they're important and that this occasion is worthy of me dressing in a certain way, right? And dressing in a way that I don't normally dress. And I think that is one occasion. I don't know if that would count as conspicuous consumption, really, would it?
Not
But
at all.
that was one occasion in which I think sort of elevating your mode of self-expression in terms of fashion is one way in which I think it's at least authentic in a positive way,
Yeah.
as opposed to being phony on a dating app.
Yeah.
What do you think, Alisha? You're the ultimate judge of this. The,
I was thinking about the fact that like I feel like it's a thing that younger generations are very much into the idea of authenticity and trying to find
Mhm,
it, even if
mhm,
what we think is authentic doesn't tend to be authentic.
mhm,
Um, but with this inauthenticity, I feel like overconsumption flattens the experience. Like we were talking about that experience of we did an episode on travel and like both of us were very passionate about the fact of experiencing the place that you're in,
mhm,
not a curated experience of the
yeah,
place where like I did a project in Dr. Ricardo's class where I was looking a good portion of the tourist money that comes into countries, most of it does not stay within that country.
mhm,
It usually stays within giant corporations that are usually based
mhm,
back in the US.
mhm,
So hotels and things like that. And I think that that conspicuous consumption trying to peacock your status and all of those things,
mhm,
it leads down this route of not only devaluing, you're not having that I hate using the word so much, that authentic experience, that real experience of seeing how someone else lives, seeing a different perspective and things. Um, it's flat into taking a picture in front of an Eiffel Tower.
mhm,
Um, it's very interesting, like now that I am starting to travel and stuff, my next trip is going to be Puerto Rico, so I can't wait to take pictures there. But as I'm like when I was in New York taking pictures, a lot of times I would see other people taking pictures, and it's not like it's an insane thing. Um, but one time me and David were in the park and there's this really gorgeous rock, and we ended up taking a picture on it. But I was talking about the fact that like the idea that we would have gone to that park just to go take that picture and
mhm,
then just leave and not like we didn't walk around Central Park as much as he wanted to. He wanted to show everything, but I was like, there's a lot of hills here. There's no hills at all. I can't do this.
mhm.
Um, but yeah, it's very much something I'm conscious, and I'm wondering if other people are conscious of it too when they are trying to do something that is very normalized, just taking a picture, for a memory and stuff. But when we put it under that lens of conspicuous consumption, when you're trying to present it to other people, when you're trying to uh, show, represent your class through whatever you're doing, I just feel like it's a bad path. It feels like it devalues the experience.
The
That's very profound.
yeah, and you can clearly look at it that way. Of course, using Rich's example, when you go into a courthouse and you're representing, you're recognizing the value of that institution, and so you want to look a certain way when you go into that place. Uh,
Yeah.
we in the business world, and especially as faculty in the school of business, we tell students that they have to look a certain way, that they have to project. They have to project. That's
Yeah.
exactly what this is what we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. What
Projecting
you want to
something that
be.
you're not, and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it and it's not that we're trying to project something that you're not, but you need to project a certain
You're
knowledge
projecting an
base.
aspiration, right? I
That's
guess. Right.
exactly it. And
Yeah.
so you have to have the verbiage. You've got to use the right business verbiage. So you've got to have that. So even if you're not completely fully aware um, of all the knowledge you need to have, because you'll learn some of that knowledge in the workplace, you still have to project a certain level of confidence. You have to project a certain level, even if you're not. You've got to you got to wear clothes that will convey. If you're going into finance
Yeah.
versus being a social worker,
Right.
you're going to convey something different at
Yeah.
each time.
Yeah.
Now, the question though is how genuine are you being, and how deceptive are you being? That's the point, right? Or
Right.
that's the point of some of it. What's really interesting in the school place, um, that we've noticed in the last 15 years, people who have a lot of money would use social media and use their phones and use their environments to downplay the clothing that they weren't wearing. So they would wear t-shirts and grungy shorts and shoes and looking kind of grungy, but they're film stars, they're movie stars, and everything else. And so,
Mhm.
guess what happens? Now, students come into class
Yeah.
looking grungy and everything else, and
Yeah.
and then also techies in Silicon Valley, because they're being paid for their mind, not necessarily how they dress, and so they dress down.
Yeah.
So then, so then there's this. It's almost the opposite of what's happening, and that is, if I project that I don't have to wear nice clothes, I'm projecting that I've got enough money and knowledge base
Yeah.
that I don't have to worry about how I look. And that's the inverse to, I believe, what this concept is. But
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. It's
very, but
interesting.
it's very
Yeah.
real. It's
Yeah.
very real, and it is truly, it's a factor that it's a part of this.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. What do you think the psychology behind wealthy, famous people dressing down is, as opposed to dressing up?
I
Uh,
think
You
it's
know,
better to say, while I think it's still accurate to say that working class emulated the upper class and stuff, it
mm,
is not to say that the upper classes love to emulate the style and fashion of communities that they would abhor.
fascinating. Yeah. Yeah. There is a lot of that phenomenon, isn't there?
Like I think about like the
Yeah.
Bohemian Society of like the 1900s, like the
Yeah.
actors and the
Yeah.
people that were considered, they were looked down on. Um, but a lot of the fashion and art that they created was consumed and emulated by a lot of people.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Hell, the Harlem Renaissance, I think, is a good
Yeah. Yep.
Well, to answer your question, Rich, I think what will happen is I think that individuals who have a lot of wealth and have that capability, I think that they'll walk around and they'll be photographed again, the clothes will be expensive clothes. Don't worry about that.
Mhm.
But they won't look well put together. I think that's part of the genre. But then
Yeah.
don't worry, when they have to be in a formal environment, you will see them with tuxedos, and you'll see them in beautiful dresses, very expensive, $1,000. So they're able to project whatever they want, whereas
Yeah.
I think with conspicuous consumption that where we're trying to constantly emulate a higher level
Yeah,
of position that we are. I think that's um, I think
yeah.
that's a whole different thing because then the downside to it is how much do we spend more money, we spend more time, and a lot of time is that a positive thing for us? And sometimes and often it's not. Often we buy vehicles, we buy things, we buy a house with a pool that we don't use the pool because other people have done it. We buy a bigger house than we need. We buy more expensive clothes than we need,
Yeah.
cars, maybe watches, and all the things. We replace our sofas and chairs in our homes just because we think that they're kind of getting old, and we
Yeah.
want our friends and family to, whatever, fill in. Whereas if you go back 50 or 60 years, your grandparents would have that sofa for 30 years, for 40
Yeah.
years, right?
Yeah.
They wouldn't move. So I think that I think there's clearly some of that, but we're definitely
Yeah.
in a space where we're definitely wanting to emulate and we're definitely wanting to appear
Hmm.
at a higher socioeconomic position than we truly are.
This is completely speculative, and you guys can tell me I'm full of crap um, for even suggesting this. But I don't think Thorstein Veblen ever talked about it. But I'm almost wondering if conspicuous consumption as a social phenomenon, as a socioeconomic phenomenon, may have to do to some extent because in Thorstein Veblen's time, you had society becoming more and more democratized and a changing situation where the upper class, what the socioeconomic upper class felt threatened. Um, and in many respects, I mean, you see that at a lot of levels in America. There was a lot of fear over immigration. You had writers that were trying to preserve this sense of trying to think of the most famous author. Doesn't come to mind right now. You had a lot of people who were worried that there was really a menace in psychology. You had this phenomenon they called the menace of the feeble-minded, which is all these, if you allow these lower classes to reproduce too much, it was going to bring down the,
Eugenics.
yeah, eugenics. You had tons of immigration. I mean, worse than now. You had worries about, I mean, we had immigration quotas that eliminated whole populations from the wrong places. And they, had these teeming ghettos, and the people who lived in the rich areas, Madison Avenue in New York City, were worried that their neighborhoods were going to get overwhelmed by these people. And that was Veblen's time, and conspicuous consumption appeared to be because you had this struggling upper class, in a sense, it was trying to find its identity. You had conspicuous consumption be very important and exhibited by them, by that class. Whereas now, interestingly, it's a phenomenon, as we've pointed out in many respects, of the middle class. That's conspicuous consumption seems to be a middle class. The upper classes don't care. As a matter of fact, like you said, they love walking around and looking grungy and ripped jeans and everything else. And they don't care. It's the middle classes, right, that want to drive Lexuses and sports cars and stuff like that to project an image. And interestingly, right, are we not in a time now where the middle class in the United States is the struggling class that doesn't know where it stands, that's eroding rapidly because of economic and social pressures? I don't know. Is that maybe I guess what I'm saying is maybe the phenomenon of conspicuous consumption, socioeconomic, is psychologically motivated unconsciously by a kind of class consciousness that's very insecure. The insecurity of a certain kind of class consciousness that needs to exhibit these emblematic status symbols to sort of preserve its, what it seems as or defend itself against this sort of increasing impotence. And as it was with the upper class back in Veblen's time. I don't know. What do you
I
think?
I
Does that make
think
any
this is,
sense?
yeah. Um, I think that the conversations we've been having about identity and stuff, it dictates a lot of what uh drives people trying
Yeah.
to find that identity, and that feeling a lack of that identity, you
Mm,
end up searching somewhere for
mm,
it.
mhm.
Um, so I can definitely see that connection.
Yeah, and it just seems like so many of the socioeconomic problems we worry about now and psychosocial problems, psychological issues that we talk about now, they're a middle class phenomenon, right? The upper classes have it made, right? The upper 5% don't have the same kind of problems, and they're not suffering the same kind of psychological and sociological issues that the middle class is right now. And I don't know, and that just seems to be where this phenomenon of conspicuous consumption seems to have popped up most egregiously. Whereas, again, back in Thorstein Veblen's time, it was in the upper classes, and they were an eroding class under siege, or at least they perceived themselves as being that way back then. I don't know. It's just an idea. And Herb looked a little doubtful when I was saying that, so I don't know. Do you think that has any weight? That carries any weight? That's Rich Grego's theory. So in case that ever gets coined and famous, just remember you heard it right here. That conspicuous consumption is a sociological emblem of psychosocial um, insecurity. What do you think?
So, for all the years in the last 40 years of studying business and psychology, and
Yeah,
even though marketing is not my forte, I'm more insular to the interior of the organization.
yeah,
We have studied that obviously buying behavior and what does buying do for us.
mm,
So some of it is not just even the projection of what we're trying to project out there, but that is we love to shop. We love to go out there and buy. And we're going to buy things that make us feel good, right?
yeah,
And this is and we're not going to buy things that we can afford. Often we're going to buy things we can't afford,
yeah,
and
yeah,
we're going to buy up, right? But, and even you talk about the middle class, even the working class and lower class, they're going to buy
yeah.
up too, right? And
Mhm.
there's no doubt that has influenced in a very negative way how much money we have spent and how much debt we have, not only as individuals, but also as a country, right? We know
Yeah,
that. But also, it's what's made our country rich as well. Okay, that's
yeah,
where the wealthy, and what we've done is we've projected this and we have sold this to the rest of the world. So
yeah,
corporations and companies have been making more money, people work, and they're able to earn more. So in looking at again, how bad is this? This is the point where we're spending enough
mhm,
time to think that people are being disingenuous, they're not being authentic enough. But at the end of the day, who does this hurt? Well, it doesn't
mhm,
hurt anybody in one sense, right? Unless you're being, unless you're being hurtful to someone, right? But what it does is collectively as a society, it can hurt us, right? Because we're projecting something that we're not, we're buying things that we can't afford, we're going into debt. That causes a whole bunch of other problems. So in that sense, it is um, if you had enough money saved up and you just weren't putting that much more, putting money into your 401k, but you were buying maybe a little bit more of an expensive car, a little bit more expensive clothes or whatever, you're not hurting anybody. Maybe when you get older and you're retired, you don't have as much money, but you're falling into all of this at this particular time of your life. But you're not hurting anybody. But collectively, as a society, where this is the behavior that people do where they truly can't afford
mhm.
something, then it starts to affect the children in the household. It puts strain on a family because they can't afford because they've they've bought more than they can really afford at a higher level. They haven't saved enough. They didn't go without where they probably could have. Um, and then the other thing, maybe didn't have a second job because if you project that you're having a second job, then you're poorer than you are, or you don't have as much wealth, all those things. Whereas if you again you go back, 50, 60 years, it wasn't uncommon for parents to have second jobs to fund their families, as they're doing today too. I know families and individuals who do that today. So the point though is how destructive is this? And I think individually it's not overly destructive, but collectively it is.
Mm.
I think it is destructive because of, like I said, the flattening. We were talking about like overconsumption is promoted by the system that we're within, capitalism. Um, when we are continuing to buy, and I think it's important to note that our wages have not gone up substantially to meet like living standards. So people have less and less money, and yet still they're conspicuously consuming things. They're still trying to reflect their class through purchasing these things, like you said, indebting yourself, all of these different things. I think it projects a false idea for people to idealize, um, and it promotes people to overconsume and devalue the things that they genuinely want to engage with.
I agree. You can always count on a Marxist critique from Alisha.
Yeah. Very good. Very.
You're right. I agree with it.
I'd be interesting to know what some of my marketing professors and finance professors would have to say. But no. I mean, and that's quite genuine and
Yeah.
real. So wow, terrific! What a wonderful conversation. And again, if you all want to see three people trying to project something that they're not in the future, come over and join. I'm just kidding. I'm speaking about myself. So I've got my two great genuine friends with me over here. Thanks, Rich. Thanks, Alisha, for another terrific Friday morning. And we wish you all a great weekend and a great week. And again, if you like us, subscribe and keep it between the lines. See you all next week.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for hanging out with us today. We look forward to next week as we cover another cool and fun topic. This podcast was produced by Three Lions Production and sponsored by Consulting and Training. Until next time, keep it between the lines.